The dust watched. It curled around boot heels and wagon wheels, settled into cracks of dry wood, and under the edges of kerchiefs pulled tight across faces. It watched without judgment, like an old dog that had seen too much to care. Out in the dead center of Ash Post, where the wind never fully slept and everything creaked like it was about to give up, a woman stood bound to the rear axle of a freight wagon. Her dress was gray, not by design but by time and smoke and the kind of dirt that no scrubbing could touch. Her wrists were tied with rough hemp, hands behind her back, rope pulled just tight enough to mark her skin red. The people of Ash Post had not spat on her, nor yelled. They didn't need to. Their silence did all the work. A circle of cold stares, women with arms crossed, men with hands on their hips like lawmen. Even the children had learned to look through her as if she were part of the hitch rail. Clara Vaughn didn't flinch. She stood with her feet square, chin slightly lifted, eyes steady on the horizon where the sun had just dipped low enough to turn the sky the color of rusted copper. Her lip bled. She'd bitten it once, hard, when they first lashed her arms. Back. She hadn't made a sound. From the edge of the crowd, Pastor Gilmore cleared his throat like a man preparing to read scripture, though his Bible was nowhere in sight. "Let it be known," he said, voice smooth as corn syrup, "that this woman acted in a manner unbecoming her place. She entered a man's home in the night. She delivered a child in secrecy. She was found with blood on her hands and lies on her tongue." No one spoke. That was the rule. Let the pastor do the speaking. Let the judgment hang in the air like heat. Let shame do the rest. Clara didn't move. From somewhere near the general store, a chair scraped. Old Miss Partridge, nearly blind and mostly forgotten, muttered, "She saved that baby, didn't she?" A younger woman, red curls pinned tight, hissed, "Hush, Ma, don't you start." The chair quieted. The wind resumed its turn around the wagon. They'd brought Clara here at midday, paraded her from the widow's house to the square like a thief. No trial, just murmurs grown loud enough to need a stage. By tomorrow morning, they said, her punishment would be complete. She would be untied and exiled, a sinner with her stain made public. But tonight she stayed bound. As the sun sagged and gold turned to dusk, the crowd thinned. Some returned home to soup and stew, to fireplaces and locked doors. Others lingered longer, pretending not to look as they looked, and then they, too, disappeared, until only the cold remained. Sheriff Dent passed once, muttering something about nothing personal. His eyes never touched hers. They never did. When true night settled, thick and full of crickets, Clara let out the breath she'd been rationing all day. She could not sit. Her legs ached. The rope chafed. But worse was the quiet. In quiet, a person starts hearing their own past again. She saw her mother, plain-faced and wide-hipped, teaching her how to wrap a newborn. "Tight, Clara, like you're giving their little bones a home. World's too big for a baby all at once." She heard the breathless gasps of a birthing mother on the floor of a candlelit kitchen. She smelled the blood and bread and lye soap. She'd done what she always did. Arrived when summoned. Helped bring life where death had hovered. Only this time the father had come home early. Drunk, accusations flew before the last cord was cut. That the child wasn't his. That Clara had orchestrated some deceit. That she was wicked in her skill, devilish in her manner. He'd dragged her out, hair in his fists. Clara had not fought. Not because she lacked fire, but because she'd known fighting in that moment would make her monstrous in their eyes. They already wanted her to be a witch. The moon climbed. Somewhere a coyote called, and then a crunch. Boots on gravel. Steady. One set, not hurried. She turned her head just slightly, enough to see the shape of a man in the gloom. Tall, wide in the shoulders, hat low, shadowing his face. He stopped 10 paces from her. She said nothing. She had nothing left to spend on words. He didn't move either. For a while, it was just the two of them, wrapped in the hum of night, the stars overhead like glass scattered on black velvet. Finally, he took a step closer. She could see him better now. His coat was worn, dust-streaked. His belt had the weight of a holster, but the gun stayed quiet. His hands were large and calloused, one resting near his side, the other curled loose. "You the one they tied for shame?" he asked softly. She met his gaze. His eyes were not curious. They were still, like water before it breaks. "Seems so," she answered. "Did you do it?" She shook her head slowly. "I delivered a child. That's all." He nodded like that was what he expected. Another silence, but not the cruel kind this time. This one made room for breath. He turned then and walked past her, boots crunching softly. For a moment she thought he'd keep going. Let her be just one more thing the dust forgot. But then, behind her, a sound. A blade flicked from its sheath. Rope hissed as it was sliced. Her arms fell free with a weightless thump, sudden and jarring. Pain spiked up her shoulders as blood rushed back. She gasped. He caught her gently, not holding, just steadying. "Why?" she breathed. He looked at her like a man who understood rope too well. "Because no one deserves to be tied for doing right," he said, then added, quieter, "and I got no use for towns that forget that." They didn't run. They walked. Through the edge of sleeping ash post, where windows stayed shut and curtains fluttered like guilty things. He led her to a horse tied beyond the livery and helped her up without speaking. The horse didn't protest. It moved like it had carried secrets before. They rode slow, not to flee, but to give the night time to forget them. Hours passed. Stars wheeled overhead. Clara didn't ask where they were going. It didn't matter. What mattered was the way the rope no longer bit into her skin, the way someone had seen her, not as a lesson or a warning, but as a woman with hands that had only ever brought life. At dawn, when the sky pinked and the world softened, they crested a ridge above the wide plains. He pointed. Below, nestled by a bend in the river, a cabin sat low and unremarkable. Smoke trickled from its chimney. "You can rest there," he said, "as long as you need." She studied him. His voice hadn't changed, still quiet, still sure. But his eyes looked away now, like he feared she'd see too much in them. Clara looked toward the cabin, then down at her raw wrists. "I don't need much," she murmured. He answered without smiling, but with something that felt near it. "Then, you'll fit just fine." Behind them, the dust stirred, lifting gently into the wind. It would watch the town forget. It always did, but this time it would also remember the shape of two riders disappearing into a morning that didn't ask them who they'd been, only who they might become. The man did not speak much, and when he did, his words arrived like snow, slow, soft, and rare enough to mean something. They reached the cabin just as the sky melted from lavender to blue, the prairie winds combing through the grasses like fingers in long hair. Clara's arms ached from riding, her body stiff from the ordeal of the night before. But something quieter had taken root inside her now, something that hummed just beneath her ribs. It wasn't safety, not yet, but it was the absence of fear. He unsaddled the mare without a word, hung the bridle on a nail by the barn door. The cabin's yard was simple. Split-rail fence sagging in parts, a row of dented wash-tubs turned upside down near a lean-to, and a stack of firewood that told her he lived here alone but kept ready for more. Clara stepped down onto sore feet and glanced at the man again. He hadn't offered his name, and she hadn't asked. It wasn't time yet. Inside, the cabin smelled of smoke and cedar, and something that reminded her of beeswax and pine. A cot sat in one corner, thick quilt folded neatly atop it. A table, with two chairs. A stove blackened with years of faithful labor. No decoration but a single horseshoe nailed above the door, turned down, which meant the luck had spilled out long ago. He motioned for her to sit. "I'll fetch water," he said, and was gone before she could thank him. She sat there a long while, letting the quiet fill her lungs, letting her shoulders learn they no longer needed to brace. When he returned with a bucket, she had fallen asleep with her head on the table and her arms crossed like a child after prayer. He set the water down gently. The only sound was the fire snapping in the stove. Clara stirred. "You didn't have to," she began. "I know," he said, and that was all. They didn't speak again that day. He cooked beans in a cast-iron pot and offered her half with some bread that had gone dry but not bitter. She ate like a woman who hadn't been fed kindness in weeks. He didn't watch her eat, just sat beside the fire, fixing a stirrup, hands working steady as clockwork. She slept on the cot that night, and he didn't come near. Took the floor with a blanket like it was natural. Morning came with frost on the window edges and blue shadows, across the floor. She rose, expecting him to still be asleep, but he was already gone. Tracks leading toward the woods, axe missing from the hook. He returned just before noon with 2 squirrels, a burlap bag of wild onions, and no explanation. None was needed. That became their rhythm. Unspoken understanding in a world that had offered her none. Days passed like that, measured not in conversations but in glances and the sounds of a man building trust without asking for it in return. And slowly, Clara began to mend. She washed her dress in the river, let it dry in the wind, found an old flannel shirt in a chest and wore it like armor, gathered herbs from the field, yarrow, tansy, a little wild sage, and laid them out to dry. But healing, even, in quiet, is never clean. One afternoon, while she was gutting fish beside the creek, her hand slipped. The blade sliced deep across her palm. She didn't cry out, just hissed and pressed it tight with her skirt. Blood trickled, soaking through. He appeared beside her like the wind carried him. "Let me see," he said. She opened her hand. His brow furrowed, not in anger but concern, like a craftsman finding a crack in the grain. He took her hand with such gentleness it stunned her. "Kitchen," he said. "I've got what you need." He cleaned the wound with whiskey, wincing more than she did. Wrapped it with muslin, careful and slow. His hands were scarred, nicks and burns, one knuckle crooked like it had broken wrong. Hands that knew labor. Hands that did no harm. When he tied the final knot, she spoke without thinking. "You treat people like they break easy." He looked at her then. Really looked. "Everything does," he said. She didn't answer. Not aloud. But something in her settled, like a cup placed finally on a shelf that fit. That evening, as dusk painted the horizon in ash and plum, she asked his name. He was rocking in the chair he'd made himself, sharpening a knife. "Elias," he said. "Just that." She nodded. "Clara." "I know, they left it there. But knowing a name is not the same as knowing a soul. That came slower. It came in the way he paused sometimes when he passed the saddle hanging in the barn, the one too small for him. In the way his gaze lingered on the edge of the woods, as if someone he'd once waited for might still come riding out. In the way he moved around her with the caution of a man who'd once been burned and still bore the scent of smoke. He never asked what happened in Ash Post. She never offered, but one night, after the fire had died down and the room was all shadows and silence, she spoke. "I was called to birth a child, that's all." He didn't look at her, just watched the coals blink. The man came home angry, accused me of sins I hadn't imagined, let alone done. Still, he said nothing. They tied me up to make an example. Now he looked. "What for?" She took a breath, shaky. "For knowing. Things a woman isn't supposed to know. for surviving something they don't understand. He was quiet a long time. Then, "You did more than survive." It wasn't praise. It was truth, and it reached somewhere deep, like light into a locked room. The next morning, she found a second cot beside hers. Not a word had been said, but it was there, hand-built, simple, firm. She ran her fingers across the wood, a gesture not of gratitude, but recognition. Outside, the wind had changed, southward now, carrying the scent of sage and rain, and with it came trouble. Near noon, the mare whinnied sharp, and Elias was already at the window before she turned. 3 riders, distant but approaching. He didn't panic, just stood, dusted, his hands, and reached for the rifle he hadn't needed in weeks. Clara stepped beside him. "Friends," he shook his head. "They're too proud to ride soft." Her breath caught. "Ash post? Could be." The riders crested the ridge, shadows against the sun. Clara looked at her hands. One healed, one still bandaged. Then at Elias, who stood not in front of her, but beside. He glanced at her once. "Go inside," he said, but she didn't move. Not this time. The world had tried to bind her with shame and call it justice. But here she stood next to a man who carried quiet, like a lantern, who saw past bruises and rumors and found the heartbeat underneath, and she would not hide from what came. Not anymore. As the riders drew closer, kicking up dust that curled like ghosts behind them, Clara squared her shoulders. Let them come. Let them see the woman they tried to ruin still standing, beside a man who believed in her without needing proof. And as the dust rose again around the cabin, watching with its silent, ancient gaze, Clara did not flinch. The wind blew harder that day, like it, too, knew something was about to change. 3 riders came through the fence line without slowing, their horses lathered and proud, bits clenched hard between their teeth. Dust clung to their coats like the past clings to the damned, impossible to scrub off no matter how far you ride. They didn't knock, just reined in a few yards from the porch, shoulders square, eyes cold with the kind of righteousness that men wrap around cruelty to make it feel like justice. Elias stood with the rifle slung low across his arms, calm as snowfall. Clara stood beside him with her hands at her sides, her body straight, but her heart beating like a drum made of memory and bone. The first man was wide through the chest and narrow in the eyes. He had the face of a sheriff who liked being feared more than obeyed. "She here?" he asked. Elias didn't answer. Not yet. The second man shifted in his saddle, a wiry thing with a patchy beard and a laugh that sounded like boots scraping gravel. "We don't mean harm, sir. Just need the woman returned. Ain't personal." Clara's voice rose before she could swallow it down. "You tied me to a wagon and left me for dead. That feel personal to you?" The third rider, young, maybe 20, shifted uncomfortably, like he hadn't known the full story until just then. His eyes met Clara's, and then darted away, ashamed. Elias took a single step forward. "She's not going anywhere," the sheriff-like man frowned. "You harboring a criminal now, stranger?" "No crime," Elias said. "Just your shame trying to ride clean." The man's jaw tightened. "She was tried by the town. Public morality. You can't undo that with a warm cot and a long stare." Elias didn't raise the rifle, but he didn't lower his gaze either. Clara stepped down from the porch and moved to stand in front of him. "I delivered a child that would have died if I hadn't known what to do," she said. "The mother lived too. Only thing I'm guilty of is knowing more than a man wanted his wife to know." The wind sighed through the grass. The young rider looked down at his reins. The sheriff dismounted. The creak of leather, the soft thump of boots on dirt. A holster hung low on his hip, worn from use. "You don't belong here," he said to her. "I didn't belong there," she replied. "There's a difference." He moved closer, boots crunching dry earth. "You think you've found safety out here? This man don't know you. Not really. He'll see it, same as we did. The pride, the defiance. He'll tire of it." Elias didn't move. "She belongs here more than you do," he said. The man laughed once. Dry. Empty. "She's got no husband, no name worth protecting. Only the lies she tells herself so she can sleep." Clara's breath caught, but she didn't flinch. She looked to Elias then, not to be saved, but to be seen, and in his eyes there was no doubt. She can stay as long as she chooses. "He," said, finally lifting the rifle just enough to show he meant it. The sheriff cursed under his breath and backed off. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe," Elias said, "but it's mine to make." The three men turned and rode out slowly, not defeated, but denied. And that, Clara knew, was enough, for now. Still, fear doesn't vanish just because a threat rides away. It lingers. It sinks into the bones like rain into old wood. And that night, neither of them slept much. She stood by the fire, arms crossed, staring into the coals. Elias sat nearby, fixing a strip of leather with a needle, and silence. "You don't even know what they said about me," she murmured. He glanced up, quiet. "They said I used herbs to hex the child, that I wanted the mother's soul to bargain with. They said I bewitched the husband, too, just by touching his wife's wrist." He set the leather down. "Do you believe any of that?" She shook her head. "Of course not." "Then neither do I." Tears stung her eyes, but she didn't. Let them fall. "I'm so tired of being a story men tell to scare each other." "You're not a story," he said softly. "You're the truth. They just can't carry it." The wind outside howled again, but inside the walls of that quiet house, something began to take root. Not love, not yet, but the soil of it. Fertile. And waiting. Over the next days, they worked without words. She helped mend a fence post. He taught her how to shape a bit of iron for the stove. When her hand trembled too much, he steadied it with his own, without comment. She began to laugh again, once. Just once. But it came from somewhere real. And Elias, though he never said much, started looking at her like she belonged. Like she'd always been there, and he'd just been waiting to remember. But the danger wasn't gone. Not truly. One afternoon, Clara rode out to the creek to gather watercress. The air was thick with coming rain, and clouds bruised the sky. She was bent low by the edge of the bank when she heard the twig snap behind her. She rose slowly, not turning right away. When she did, she saw the young rider. The one who couldn't. "Meet her eyes before?" He held his hat in his hands, hair stuck to his brow with sweat. "I ain't here to cause trouble," he said quickly. "Swear it." She didn't move. I wanted to say I didn't know. What they were doing. What they'd done." She eyed him. "And now," he looked away. "They're planning to come back. Nightfall tomorrow. More of 'em. Not just the townfolk. They've stirred up men from Ridgeback and Holler's Point, the kind who like setting fires when they run out of words." Clara's breath caught. "Why tell me?" He shrugged. "'Cause I saw your face when they tied you up, and I see it now. You don't deserve to run from your life." She nodded once, slow. "Thank you." He backed away like a ghost, vanishing into the brush. She rode back faster than she'd come. Elias was chopping wood. She slid off the horse before it stopped moving. "They're coming again," she said, voice tight. "More of them. By nightfall. Tomorrow." He didn't ask how she knew. He believed her. That was enough. He nodded once, calm as always. "I'll prepare." And he did. But not just the way she expected. Yes, he checked the rifle, laid out tools that might be needed, blocked the lower windows with boards. But then he did something she hadn't anticipated. He cleared the table, lit 2 candles, set down the last of the sweet potatoes they'd saved from fall, and invited her to sit. "Why?" she asked, startled. He looked at her, eyes steady. "Because we don't know what tomorrow holds, but tonight we eat like it's ours." She sat across from him, hands trembling just a little. The candlelight made the walls look warmer, like the wood itself had memories. They ate in silence, but not the kind that chokes, the kind that listens. After the meal, he stood. She expected him to retreat to his chair. Instead, he offered his hand. "Dance," he said, awkward, hopeful. There was no music, but her heart had a rhythm. She took his hand. They danced, slow and clumsy, the way people do when they're building something ancient from something new. And outside, the wind whispered through the grass, carrying warnings and old names. But inside the house where silence had grown, there was now laughter, faint but real. The fire crackled low. She looked up at him. "What if they burn it down?" she whispered. He met her eyes. "Then we build again." And for the first time in a long, long time, she believed they could. Dawn arrived like a hush, soft amber light spilling through the cracks in the boarded windows, turning dust into gold. It was the kind of morning that should have belonged to birdsong and coffee, to idle glances and stories told between chores. But silence settled in the corners instead, thick with waiting. Clara sat at the edge of the bed, boots laced, eyes wide open since the darkness. The house felt different now. Still warm from last night's dance, but holding its breath. Elias had already been up an hour. He moved through the yard like a man whose bones knew what was coming. He wasn't rushed, but nothing in his steps was wasted either. Every movement said we prepare, not panic. She joined him just as he was checking the line of jars inside the root cellar. Emergency provisions. "In case, always in case. You think they'll come before sundown?" she asked, voice low like wind through pine. He didn't look up. "Hard to know, but cowards like to strike when the light's dying. They think it hides what they are." Clara scanned the hills beyond the fence line. Shadows still pooled in the folds of the earth. Somewhere out there, fire rode on horseback and names were being muttered like curses. She touched the worn wood of the porch rail and breathed deep. "I won't run," she said. Elias looked at her then, not surprised, just solemn. "I wouldn't ask you to." There was no need for a plan with 50 moving parts, no strategy scribbled on scraps of paper, just one house, 2 people, and a promise neither of them had spoken aloud yet, but both had already kept. When the first rider appeared on the ridge, the sun had just begun its long descent. The light bent low and red, like it, too, was watching. By the time the rest of the riders gathered behind him, they were a dozen strong, and loud. Not with guns, but with taunts. Laughter that didn't quite reach their eyes. They came not to kill, at least not at first, but to unmake, to unravel what Clara had begun to weave back together. They rode right up to the gate and didn't dismount. Clara stood beside Elias, arms crossed, skirts tugged by the breeze. The sheriff-like man, back again and darker in the face than before, called out with a voice that knew too much power and too little mercy. "We gave you time to think it over," he said. "You kept her anyway." Elias said nothing, just kept one hand resting on the post beside him. His rifle leaned nearby, but he hadn't lifted it. "She's a liar," the man went on. "She tricked a good woman's husband into madness. Poisoned. His wife with tinctures made from weeds. The child's weak, sickly, might not live. They blame her." Clara didn't flinch. "Because it's easier than blaming themselves." The crowd behind him stirred. Some seemed unsure, others hungry, for a reason to shout. "She's an outcast," the man continued. "You keep her, you take on her stain." Elias stepped forward. "Just one step. I've lived alone 10 years. Nothing stained me but silence. She's the first thing that's felt true in all that time. Laughter from the crowd, sharp-edged, dangerous now. "We can drag her out and be done," someone muttered. Another voice, "Burn it. Let 'em both crawl from the ashes." The sheriff raised a hand, still in control, still the wolf pretending to be shepherd. "Last offer. Send her out. Let her answer to the town. We'll leave you be." Elias didn't even glance at Clara. "She stays," he said, "and I stay with her." A silence broke open, brittle and wide. The sheriff's hand dropped, and in that breathless space between threat and act, a match was struck. Clara saw it first, a flick of orange tossed into the dry grass near the barn. She moved before she thought, racing toward it with her skirts clutched high. Elias shouted after her, but she was already there, stamping it out with her boots, coughing from the smoke curling toward her face. One of the riders moved, as if to snatch her arm, but a gunshot rang through the air. The sound cracked the sky, in two, and now Elias held the rifle, pointed just inches from the man's boot. "No more," he said, voice even. "Not one more step." The man froze. The fire hissed itself dead, and for a moment the whole world held its breath again. Then, strangely, miraculously, the young rider from before stepped forward, hat in hand, face pale. "This ain't right," he said. "We rode out to send a message, not burn people alive," the sheriff snarled. "You shut your—" "I won't." The boy's voice trembled but held. "You told us she was wicked, but I saw her with a child. I saw her feed it, rock it, sing it quiet when the mother couldn't move. Ain't no witch in that. Just a woman who knows pain and stays anyway." More murmurs now. Riders shifting uncomfortably. Clara, dirt on her hands and soot in her hair, stood tall again. "You want to be rid of your shame?" she said, voice rising. "Then stop carrying it with you." The crowd stilled. No gun was raised, no torch thrown. And then, slowly, as if they realized the spell was broken, one by one the riders turned. First the boy, then the uncertain few, until only the sheriff remained. His horse pawed the dirt. He looked at Elias, then Clara. "You'll regret this," he said. But even he didn't believe it now. He turned his horse and vanished into the hills. Elias lowered the rifle. His hand was steady. Clara didn't move for a long time. Finally, he stepped beside her. "You all right?" She didn't answer right away, just leaned into him, forehead to his shoulder. "I thought I'd have to run again," she whispered. "You don't," he said. "Not from here." Later, they sat on the porch. The fire in the sky softened to gold, then to ash. The clouds turned pink, then lavender, then gone. She leaned back in the old rocking chair, bare feet curled beneath her. Elias sat nearby, carving a small wooden horse from a block of pine. "For the baby," he'd said. Clara watched the horizon. No more riders. No more dust, just the wind and peace. And a future that still had room to unfold. She turned toward Elias. "You believe in forgiveness?" He nodded. "But more than that, I believe in building something better when the old thing burns." She smiled. Small. Honest. "I'd like to build," she said. "With you." He met her gaze, and something unspoken passed between them. Something sacred and slow. The sky, above them, didn't ask permission to turn gold. It just did. Like love. Like peace. Like a woman deciding she belonged, and a man choosing to stand beside her. Not in front of her, not behind, but beside. And beneath that sky, a house once haunted by silence was now full of warmth. A truth carved deep into the heart of the West. You don't need permission to begin again. If this story filled your heart even a little, if it reminded you that strength is quiet and mercy can be loud, leave us a like, a comment, and subscribe to Pioneer Diaries. Tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to know where our stories reach. Until next time. Ride gentle, and remember, the West remembers those who chose kindness, even when it costs them.